At second reading.
Katrina Shanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to take a call on this bill this morning on its second reading. It was an interesting select committee to sit on the Commerce one with this bill. I'm a chartered accountant by trade, and also I came up through audit. So that's actually where I started in my profession. So I had a good understanding of actually the implications of this bill and what they were talking about. And it's interesting because when we talk about capital markets, and this will influence on capital markets because it's addressed for the public issuers, so audits of public issuers, it's a very narrow focus, that, you know, we have got a problem with the confidence in our capital markets, especially our mum and dad investors. And I know in Ohio I have a lot of mum and dad investors coming into my office and telling me the stories about how they lost their money and how they've got concern about what they can do in the future and what the government can help them do to find somewhere to invest which is slightly higher than a bank. But of course we know when you get into that situation that you take on additional risk. And so this in effect has been partly brought about by the finance company failure and acknowledgement that the role of auditors did play a small part in that in terms of validating, I suppose, accounts to people and financial information when people most afraid didn't quite understand what they were reading. And it's interesting because the Greens just raised the issue of, you know, social reporting and financial reporting, and the more reporting you put in, the more complex it gets, because every report you produce has got an opinion on it, especially if you're talking about a public issuer. And so if you want to have social reporting and all the other tiers of reporting, which are really great to have, actually someone has to give an opinion on that, whether it's true and fair, and that's where it gets more complex. And that's where the accounting standards get more complex. And I know Mr. David Perfect Parker, which we call him in our select committee, that he raised some points about, you know, why is it getting so complex? And it's getting so complex because there is just more requirements in those accounts, and the more requirements there are, the more standards and the more procedures you need in place to ensure that the reporting is correct. So it's never ending. It just gets more and more complex as also the financial vehicles get more complex out there. You need more rules in place and standards procedures to understand actually what's happening when you invest in vehicles which are financial vehicles that have never been in place before. There's just two areas I'd like to touch on in this bill, in this reading. One is about the liability of partners. We had concern because the bill introduced that every partner of an audit firm would commit an offence if there was a breach of any restriction or of any standard, and we thought that was far too wide. So we narrowed it down to that a partner would have to have his or her authority, permission or consent, and she could reasonably have known that the breach was going to be committed and failed to have taken reasonable steps to prevent it. So we narrowed that down significantly. Otherwise, I think you would find you would have no auditors out there to audit anything at all. And the other thing that I was really passionate about in our committee was looking at the issue of limitations on liability. At the moment, currently in New Zealand, we've got what's known as joint and several liability for auditors. And that I think it's time that actually we address this whole issue around liabilities and limitations on those liabilities. So I pushed very hard in our select committee for this to be addressed, and we got advice on several occasions because we kept on pushing it and to be told that it was out of scope. But actually I would like to see, and we put this in the commentary of the bill, that this be addressed later on and a broader review of the securities law be looked at, especially around this area of exposure to joint and several liability and the alternative systems and proportionate or capped liability that other countries are using very successfully as well. So, Mr. Speaker, I was just going to take a short call on this, and I look forward to debating this further in the House. Thank you.
Stuart.